In recent days, several political leaders and senior bureaucratic staff from internationally prominent nations have either visited Delhi or engaged in extensive virtual meetings with their Indian counterparts. Last week, UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss was in New Delhi at the same time as Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. Around the same time, US Deputy National Security Advisor Dalip Singh paid a visit to the national capital. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison held summit-level interactions with India's Prime Minister. In March, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited New Delhi. Clearly, international leaders are thinking about India. Such extensive diplomatic engagements give the impression that India's government possesses the magic button that can end the war in Ukraine, force Russian troops to return home, bridge the growing divide between the US and Russia, make Europe more peaceful, and restore Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Sergey Lavrov suggested that India can mediate between Moscow and Kyiv because the two countries' peace negotiations have yet to provide a solution to stop the war. Lavrov emphasized that India has an independent foreign policy and is not influenced by the United States, and that, if India were to play a role as a mediator in the Ukraine crisis, it could support such a process and no one would be against. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, when asked if he views Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a mediator between Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelinsky and President Vladimir Putin, he responded, "If Prime Minister Modi is prepared to play that role, we will welcome his efforts." India has not officially condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine and has kept a cautious stance on the matter. While India abstained from voting at the UN on resolutions condemning Russia, it also abstained on a resolution pushed by Russia on the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. Why does India need to do more, if not be a mediator? For decades, India has enjoyed stronger strategic ties with Russia. While its beginnings may be traced back to the Cold War, India has maintained defense and security relations with Russia long after the Soviet Union's demise. During the Cold War, the US consistently opposed to India's deeper security connections with the former Soviet Union, but it never expressed worry about Indo-Russian security ties until lately. For decades after the Cold War ended, Washington saw Russia as a security threat. The United States and Australia criticized India for studying a scheme to make rupee-ruble payments using an alternative to SWIFT. Payments will be made using Russia's messaging system, SPFS. The US and its partners are concerned that such arrangements would weaken the sanctions they have imposed. One question will soon become more prominent, based on the sort of Russia that emerges from this war, which will play a role in defining the future of India and Russia's bilateral strategic cooperation. The unprecedented magnitude of Russia's sanctions would undoubtedly cause significant economic suffering, with a severe decline in living standards and an increase in poverty and unemployment. If Russia seeks a bailout from China, it is probable that Russia's potential to remain a significant role in Eurasia will be diminished. In less severe circumstances, if some neutral countries elect to continue their association, it may not result in an economic collapse, rather, it will result in a significantly weakened country. If Russia orients toward China in order to divorce from the West, and if China is prepared to invent means to circumvent sanctions, it will become the key to Russia's economic survival under the present sanctions system. Moscow will be hesitant to back India against China. This is awful news for India. India just cannot afford to allow it to occur. Because Russia is a significant partner in India's foreign policy across the continental Eurasian region. Of course, this conclusion is contingent on China's willingness to come to Russia's rescue in a full-fledged way. The invasion of Ukraine complicates New Delhi's calculations and raises critical concerns about Russia's role in the evolving international order. India would have fewer options than it did before Russia invaded Ukraine. India's mediation in the Russia-Ukraine war may not be sufficient on its own, but when joined with the efforts of other nations friendly to Russia, it may provide an incentive for Russia to engage in genuine discussions with Ukraine. If Russia is unable to reach a diplomatic settlement, and the war continues, India may be obliged to reconsider the outlines of its long-standing cooperation with Russia. India should use its offices to remind Russia of the benefits of not being an isolated nation, and to avert a result in which it loses control of its foreign policy. Russia's geopolitical calculus is unmistakable. India is not only a significant defense market, but it is also one of the few notable countries with whom it has strong and easy connections. Russian dissatisfaction with the expanding importance of the Indian market for US military sales is apparent, and if India is not retained as a strategic partner, Moscow will suffer a significant political, diplomatic, and economic loss. This explanation explains Russian appreciation for India when the Indian delegate abstained from voting on anti-Russian resolutions at the United Nations, as well as Moscow's controlled quiet when India abstained from a Moscow-sponsored resolution at the UN. Russia's offer of cheap energy is not motivated by desperation, nor is it intended to bribe India into changing its stance on Ukrainian concerns. It has more complicated dimensions and estimations of long-term interest. India has repeatedly abstained from voting against Russia at the United Nations. Following this, the West threatened India with sanctions. Is India's stance changing? No, it went much farther in abstaining. The message that India has been sending is fairly clear. It wishes to avoid Cold War politics. It would not relinquish its strategic alliances with Russia or the United States. India's approach does neither block US strategy in Ukraine, nor does it help Russia endure the Western economic assault. As a result, India's policies cannot be described as neutral or non-aligned. It is a straightforward demonstration of strategic autonomy in the service of the country's national interest.